Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night, it is your boy, the Horrorlander. And excuse me, there's a lot of wind outside. It is very windy today, more than usual. But what better to talk about than on a wild weather day, than some scary stuff to ease your nerves? Today I'm going to be doing the first installment in a group of videos talking about my favorite horror author, Tim Curran, who I sing a lot of praise for all the time, and I would say justly so. He's a smaller author, but he has a cult following. One of the few subreddits that I love going on is the Horror Lit subreddit, and if you start talking about him on there, he's got plenty of fans who echo the same stuff as me. I've put a bunch of new people onto reading his stuff, and they've enjoyed his work. His quality is there to speak about in terms of cinematic action sequences within his books, fantastic monsters, very atmospheric, and he very much focuses on doing really scary stuff, which, in a climate of, Barnes and Noble and all these bookstores and Goodreads oftentimes promoting diet horror books, which are horror books that kind of put horror on the back burner. They're much lighter. They usually tend to focus on emotional drama and slice of life and other stuff than actual horror, even though they promote it. This guy's the opposite to that. He makes the scary stuff the main meal. And all that stuff I've talked about in my videos, but I think what makes me keep coming back to him that needs more kind of, appreciation within people who read his stuff or even just the general community, because it's something that you take for granted until you see it with others, is he is the most versatile creature feature guy that I've read. And you'll see it with some of the stories I talk about in this video. He is so versatile. He does every single kind of monster and threat under the sun. He's always trying new stuff. Even when you think he should be out of ideas, you find out he's tried something new. And you don't appreciate that until, some of the authors that I love, even though it's for kids horror, guys like R.L. Stine, he had a lot of people who kind of got sick of some stuff because he would keep using the same villains over and over again. And if he made a new villain, it would feel like previous villains that existed with the exact same type of powers and gimmicks and schemes. Only recently with House of Shivers, he's trying new stuff. And there's other adult horror authors who do that same thing. Not with Curran. Curran keeps on showing, new kinds of monsters and villains that genuinely keep on impressing you and wanting to keep dragging you back into the story, on top of that, new environments, new situations, and whatnot. And without going on a big tangent, just some small example of that is, like, some of my favorite stories, like Migration from Alien Horrors. He talked about that when he was doing these alien horror stories, extraterrestrial horror, he would look up planets. He would research planets and exoplanets and look at their biomes and biosphere and then decide, what could live on a planet like that? What could exist on something like that? And then he cooks it up. And another story of his is a historical fiction horror story called The Legend of Black Betty, which is a Wild Western. He was researching yellow fever that was running rampant during that time. And he decided, okay, what if I take this yellow fever thing, but I make it something more occult, something worse. And he made it into a voodoo woman who summoned demons and created zombies out of people, and her voodoo black magic was spreading like a plague until it reached the main character's family and he went on a vengeance mission to find her. So yeah, the guy's spectacular in that. So with these video installments, I'm going to be talking about his lost horror stories. What does that mean? So he's obviously got short story collections of his own that you can go on Amazon and different places and buy, that he makes himself and collects stuff, whether it be new stories or reprinted. But he's got plenty of short stories out there that are featured in other people's anthology collections, stuff that he just contributes to different authors or editors that ask him for stuff. And a lot of the time he had non-reprinted horror short stories, stuff that was effectively lost in time, because they were featured in small press magazines, limited release anthology books. So I've been trying to scout those and find those as much as I can. I still have like 37 left. I've gotten like 15 or 16 stories by him, maybe more, but there's still a ton left out there in the ether that maybe one day I'll be able to read, hopefully. But with these videos, I hope to bring them attention. So I'm going to be talking about non-reprinted stories or stragglers. So today I'm going to be covering 3 specifically non-reprinted horror short stories. 2 involving magazines that I got sent by the artist, of the magazine itself. He was very kind to reach out to me. Well, I reached out to him, and he reached back out to me and sent them for free. Alan Kozowski, who's a part of Alan K's Inhuman magazine, and also another magazine that I found on the internet. So the 3 stories I'm talking about today are Scarecrows in the Nebraska Moonlight, the Malagasy Man-Eater, and the Inhabitant of Harrow House. So without further ado, let's talk about the plots, and because they're super rare, I will be giving spoilers and just my brief thoughts about each story. So let's go. The first story we'll talk about is Scarecrows in the Nebraska Moonlight, which I believe is issue 5 of Alan K's Inhuman magazine. Now I have the signed copies of all of these physical books, but because I have a glare with my setup, it's just going to be in the corner. Scarecrows in the Nebraska Moonlight is a Western story. It opens up with the main character who is a prison convict who's just been recently released, and he ends up picking up this freelance job by this evangelist reverend who tells him about this family who lives out on a desolate farm out in this endless cornfield of Boone County. It's about this little girl and a mother, and the girl is blind, but she's said to have occult abilities, supernatural senses. She's able to kind of have clairvoyance. She can see into the future. She can also see into people's past, and it allows her to know things about people. She's spoken to local sheriffs and, talked about how her neighbors on a nearby ranch or farm had, killed and buried the wife in the well. So ends up, being able to read into people's thoughts and souls. She's also able to hear things, talk to inanimate objects that other people are not able to understand. So what the Reverend wants to do, because her mother is quite strange and possibly into some strange stuff going on the farm, he wants the prisoner to kidnap the girl so he can bring that little girl into his evangelist church and use her second sight for the Lord's work instead of something evil and occult, which might backfire and cause her to get into some bad stuff that can't be reversed. So the prisoner ends up taking the job. He has some suspicions that there's some malicious intent behind this reverend, maybe something that he's hiding, but he doesn't take it too much into thought because, he's done plenty of bad stuff himself and he's just taking the money. So he ends up going on his horse and riding out to Boone County in this desolate farm. And as he's going on the dirt road, he feels like with the corn, rustling and stuff, it feels like the cornfields are whispering to him that something might be watching and sensing his presence. And when he gets to the farm, he meets the little girl and the mother, and he sees that the mother has some deformities. Her eyes are kind of crooked, and she has what looks like a mutated third eye growing out of her forehead. She claims she can speak to dead people and conversates with them. And the little girl is there blind, but she's able to basically kind of talk about how she hears things out in the cornfield. She has this little creepy corn husk doll that she says that the doll talked to her, and that's how she came up with the name for it. And she speaks about some urban legends that out in the cornfield there was a member of this circus freak show who escaped, and he's this bloated, blubbery, white, toad-looking mutation of a deformed man who croaks when it's the full moon and hunts wild animals out there. And there's a Scarecrow Man entity, which is kind of like the guardian of this cornfield and their property, who finds bad people, people with ill intentions, and will take care of them, effectively kill and do horrible things to them, which she describes as how her abusive father had ended up getting taken out because her father might have been responsible for beating her and causing her to lose her eyesight, and then he was taken care of by this Scarecrow Man entity that walks around at night when the full moon is out, especially during harvest season with the harvest moon. So the guy comes in, and he basically is able to kind of work his way and disguise his intentions as him trying to be a farmhand, help around the property, make some money, in this case get more so food and shelter, kind of look like a straggler, a hiker that's looking for some work, and the whole time he's scheming on when he can kidnap the girl and run away from her. But as he starts kind of getting adjusted and doing work involving the livestock in the farm, he sees some strange things, which is that there is like the mummified corpse of one of their ancestors who's in a coffin down in the cellar. There's this lightning blasted oak tree that has these animal skulls and bones all over it, like, rodent bones, snake bones, cow bones, even some human bones. And the mother and daughter will go there periodically and start worshiping it. So there's some hints that this family might be into some witchcraft and occult stuff. And there might be more going on than meets the eye. And maybe that reverend might have been speaking some truth. The daughter then also shows him the scarecrow man. She takes him out to this little field out in the corn, and there is this rotting scarecrow there with another scarecrow. There's one covered with the sackcloth, and there's another one that has a rotting pumpkin on its head that looks like a skull, and she says that that is the scarecrow man that walks around. So this guy's pretty much had it. He's like, you know what, fuck this. Tonight is going to be the night that I go and take her, and he ends up roofing the mother at night and then plans to kidnap the daughter. But she ends up being one step ahead because she's got that supernatural ability, and she ends up running through the cornfields. He's chasing her, and he's shocked because he hears things moving around, and he starts getting paranoid, and he's shocked that she's blind, but she's able to navigate this cornfield like the back of her hand. Meanwhile, he's getting lost. And eventually he ends up falling into a trap. He ends up falling into a muddy little place in the cornfield and ends up sinking up to his thighs. And as he tries digging his way out, he sees the little girl posted up right there on the outskirt of the cornfield. And he sees that her corn husk doll is actually breathing and starts speaking in some strange language. And then he hears some loud frog-like croaking. And all of a sudden, that circus freak show entity, which was teased in the throwaway urban legend, actually comes hopping out in its deformed, blubbery frog-like look and starts to lick the guy, eat the guy's eyeballs right out of its socket as he's stuck there in the mud trying to get out. And the guy is screaming his head off, sobbing in agony. And as he loses his eyesight, which in turn parallels the fact that the girl is blind, some straw hands come out of the field and he feels them grab onto his arms and drag him out. And then it cuts to a week later. And a week later, you see that the mother has his corpse on a dining table, and she's cutting them open and stitching them with catgut and putting ingredients like graveyard dirt and spices and, rodent bones inside of them. Meanwhile, the daughter is encouraging that there's a bad man coming on its way, and the mother's like, I know. And the mother ends up putting some copper coins into his eyeballs because his face is an eaten away skull, and ends up basically bringing him to life with her witchcraft. And he starts shambling outside the door because you find out that that evangelist reverend tracked down their barn and farmhouse, came on his horse with a shotgun, and as the scarecrow man, the new one, is going out, all the other scarecrows in the field from the previous victims and bad people that got taken start all converging on the man. And they hear a shotgun noise, and then they hear the sounds of somebody getting ripped apart, their bones broken, and possibly intestines getting ripped off. And the story ends with the girl basically asking her mother if she can have a molasses cookie as a little treat. And then the mother is like, yeah, but don't have too many because it might cause some bad nightmares. So ends on a morbidly lighthearted note despite what just happened. I give the story a 9 out of 10 great. I love this story. I love the Western angle to it. I love everything involving the daughter and the mother, family relations, all the occult stuff going on. The scarecrow man is really creepy. The fact that this guy is going there for like a under, disguised, malicious intention, and the fact that all these things keep getting revealed to him and he's like, oh fuck, am I the one who's trapped? Like, am I the one who might be in a bad situation? And the idea of scarecrows coming to life and the scarecrow man and all that, weird, crazy witchcraft stuff. It's all great. I loved it. And I wish it was longer. I wish we got to see more of this family, maybe some other stuff. But nonetheless, this was a great short story. So, good read. The next story we'll talk about is The Malagasy Man-Eater. This one is in issue 6 of Alan Kay's Inhuman magazine. I briefly showed the artwork that Alan Kay drew of the Scarecrow story, so I'll just flash up the artwork for this one. The Malagasy Man-Eater follows a husband and wife who are deep in Madagascar in the humid, tropical, rough terrain of the rainforest, being guided by a local guide. And the reason is because the wife is not fond. She's from New York City, from the urban life, and she hates this humid, wild, exotic place that's taking a toll on her and scaring the shit out of her, basically. But her husband is a botanist, and he's kind of like an eccentric one. He goes out and looks for exotic wildlife, carnivorous plants, and stuff like that. And there's local urban legend about this carnivorous tree, a man-eating plant that is said to exist here in Madagascar. And it dates back to apparently prehistoric times, the Jurassic period, because apparently back during the prehistoric ages when flora and fauna were at its highest and some big sizes and crazy evolutions. Madagascar is an island that broke apart from Africa, so this is one of the last living specimens. There's wildlife and things that live in Madagascar that otherwise would be extinct elsewhere in the world. So he's going and trying to look for it. And initially the wife thinks it's a bad idea, but this guy is persistent. He wants to find it because it'll make him big. It'll be a big discovery and make him famous in the biological and botanist world. And eventually they do end up finding this carnivorous prehistoric tree. And it is quite horrific in its appearance because they describe it to look like almost like a upside down octopus. There is these hundreds of corpse white tentacle like tendrils that come down from the top of it. It's got vines that it uses as sensory organs. There are these 4-inch long, green thorns that are poking out of its bark. And at the bottom are these Venus flytraps kind of sized up. They're the size of canoes, 10 to 12 feet long and deep enough that a man or human being could sit inside of it. And the spikes on the Venus flytraps are so big, almost looks like a bear trap more so, enough to basically impale steel. So it's quite the sinister and horrific sight. And this proves to the husband that this plant is in fact real. This specimen does exist. But the locals are afraid of it. This tree is said to be superstitious, spiritual. It's said to be a bad omen. A lot of the locals are scared because local tribes used to basically sacrifice women to this. There was a local tribe called the Akondo, which treated this as a sort of spiritual altar, took care of this thing, kept it deep in the jungle, and would sacrifice their own women to it. There was a tribe even before them of Aboriginals who used to worship this thing, and their ghosts are said to haunt the jungle. So since ancient times, this thing has been the place of occult and superstition. But they decide to stay there and watch this thing start hunting. And eventually when a local lemur comes up, this thing starts to secrete this red syrup. It almost looks like the tree is bleeding with blood. And this syrup says to create this hallucinogenic effect, it releases spores the same way that a pitcher plant attracts insects and frogs into its trap. This thing releases spores and hallucinogenics that cause psychedelic effects. And as the lemur basically gets intoxicated by it, you then see that the tree reacts. It starts tingling and sensing. And all those hundreds of corpse white tentacle tendrils come down and attack it and wrap it up like anacondas, squeeze the life out of it, crush it, smash it to pieces. And then the Venus flytraps that are in a ring around the base start to rise up, and the thing gets dropped in there, gets impaled by the spikes and eaten up. And the wife is completely shocked. She's freaked out. She thinks it's too much, and she has to go back to base camp where they were at, out of the jungle. And the husband is infuriated because he doesn't see anything evil about this tree. He doesn't see anything spiritual or occult, even though he knows all of the urban legends and stories. Meanwhile, the wife is taking it to heart. She thinks the thing is evil. She's heard all the legends and stories about haints and vampires and other crazy things out there as wildlife that can kill you. So seeing this just takes a toll on her. And when she gets back to the base camp, she starts to have nightmares. She starts to hallucinate, and the local people and tribesmen start getting worried. The scientists are kind of just treating it as whatever, because every single time that she's having nightmares, she imagines that she's getting attacked and eaten by this tree, that the tree is calling her. And she talks to the local guide who starts spreading these stories about what their people believe in this thing. And she starts describing that the taste of it is left on her mouth. She can smell the rotten cherry smell of that, hallucinogenic nectar. She's felt like she's being called to it. It almost feels like this tree is calling her and beckoning her to come back. And she feels like she's going to die alone out in this remote jungle. And her husband tries to reassure her. So he tells her, you know what, we can take you back to the tree. I can prove to you that there's nothing wrong. There's nothing strange going on here. And she right away, a little bit too excitedly, says yes. And they end up tracking back into the jungle by themselves and finding the place where this plant is at. And immediately when she gets there, it starts releasing those spores again, that smell. She starts seeing kaleidoscope-like vibrant psychedelic colors, indigo, scarlet, corals, all these different things. and she ends up getting into a trance. And she ends up going to the tree and starts sexually rubbing herself against it, taking off her clothes. She starts impaling her body against those, thorns and barbs, almost like sacrificial daggers that she's bleeding down the tree as an altar. And next thing you know, as she's in this state of just pure bliss and joy, all those tentacle tendrils come down, wrap her up, crush her. She gets eaten by the Venus flytraps, and the husband is so shell shocked that he stays there all afternoon and night, completely bewildered by what just happened. And after that, he basically has to take the remainder of her gear and get back to boot camp. And strangely, he has a sense of satisfaction. Meanwhile, she also met her end in a grisly way, but emotionally, she feels complete because this tree ended up doing her the biggest favor, which is that getting her out of this green hell of a jungle that she was stuck inside of and felt trapped by. So that's pretty much the story. This one I give a 8.4 out of 10 good. I like some aspects about this story, which is that it reminds me of the Tales from the Crypt Presents movie Ritual. The first story I talked about, the Scarecrow ones, felt like, the four-sided triangle episode, which is a horrible episode, but Tim Curran kind of took some aspects of it and it just made it way better. This one feels like Tales from the Crypt Ritual because it talks about, the indigenous culture, occult, spiritual, religious aspects. There's some, subtle commentary about how indigenous people may try to add spiritual aspects and worship things that are just a normal part of nature because you are left to assume that the plant is just behaving as it's supposed to, evolutionary hunter and mechanism, and all this hallucinogenic effect from the spores is what causes people to treat it as this, spiritual next level entity. But at the same time, there's some mystery left behind because, the local guide was there when the time it first fed. The husband was there, but only the wife got affected. And it said that they sacrificed women to this thing in the past. So kind of left some mystery as to, is it really that type of commentary or is there actually something more to this entity? And you got Plant Horror. Plant Horror by Tim Curran, so that's like the first time for that, or one of the few times for that. So yeah, really enjoyed this one, liked all those aspects that I mentioned, so this was a good story. Not as good as the first one, but still, fun one. The last story comes from Dark Animus issue 3, dating back to 2003. This is The Inhabitant of Harrow House. The Inhabitant of Harrow House shows you a small town suburb in America where you see some blue collar workers at Monday Night Football in a bar drinking their asses off, and you get introduced to the main character, who's this backwoods hillbilly guy named McKenna, who's a drunkard. He's a notorious hothead, causes problems, but he works for a landscaping business, and because it's winter time and there's been vicious blizzards that's been happening, he can't find much work. And that's when a blue collar friend of his, a colleague at the bar, ends up revealing that he won some money off of a giveaway or lottery or something, and he ends up offering a couple $100 to McKenna if he's willing to go up to the local haunted house of urban legend in this town called Harrow House. Now, Harrow House is a decrepit old mansion out in the deep woods that was said to belong to a lumber baron who passed it on to his descendants and family called the Harrow family. And all of the 7 members of the Harrow family had died or gone missing, minus one, who was the eldest sibling, named Annabelle Harrow. And she was rumored to be a satanic worshiper, a witch who performed a lot of black magic, summoned demons and stuff out of hell around that area. And there's been plenty of hikers and drifters who go missing around that part of the woods. And even McKenna, growing up with his brothers and cousins in the woods, used to be afraid of that house, and when they would go near, they swear they could see somebody in there and run away. But he thinks everybody here is a bunch of babies, and he can get some basically good money off of this considering his business is at a low. So he decides to take up on it, and right away when he leaves and goes out into the blizzard to get his gear and his truck, you see that the guys basically kind of set him up for it. They're all afraid of that place, and while some are skeptical, other ones feel like it's a good way to get rid of this pain of a guy that's there in their neighborhood. And he ends up going through the snowy roads where blizzard is coming down hard. He gets his drinks, he gets his food, some gear, and he brings his chainsaw from work because he'll have to break into the house. And there's a funny line too where as he's like going through the roads and there's several inches of snow and it's coming down, there's an analogy given that it's like a high dollar hooker. It just keeps coming and coming, which is an absurd line, but it is funny. And he ends up getting to Harrow House, breaking in. And when he gets in, he sees that, all the typical things. It's a decrepit mansion. The porch is all rotted. There's holes in the ceiling. There's like giant cavernous holes in the roof. There's snow from where snow came in. There's animal carcasses spread throughout there. And when he looks up at the giant hole in the ceiling, he swears he could see like a hollow face that moves back, but he thinks he might be just getting paranoid. And he sees something confirmed, which is that even though there's 2 floors to this Harrow house, there's no staircase because it's believed that Annabelle Harrow had taken out all the staircases. So he eventually ends up finding this dumbwaiter and ends up hoisting himself up and going up to the 2nd floor of this Harrow house, in which he, I think, says, like, get ready, old bitch Harrow, keep your legs crossed because Frank McKenna's coming up there. And he ends up getting bitched because when he gets up there, he sees that there is just sheets, Christmas garlands of deep spider webs that are covering everything. And there's animal carcasses inside of the spider webs. It's just cocooning this entire 2nd floor. Cat carcasses, rat carcasses, and whatnot. And eventually he gets to this open, dark doorway, which is shadowy and horrifying. And when he enters in there, he sees a horrific sight, and you don't know what happens to him. But then it cuts to a local county sheriff who's driving by the road, and he ends up spotting this abandoned pickup truck there and ends up following the trail, bringing his shotgun and flashlight. And he ends up going to Harrow House, going up the dumbwaiter and seeing all the sights, the crazy things that are on the 2nd floor. And eventually he gets into the room and sees the mummified corpses, drained bodies of all the drifters and hikers that have gone missing in the woods, all the leftover Harrow family members in there, even some fresher looking victims, missing women, children, and men who are just in this funnel web of a room filled with spider webs. And he sees McKenna tangled up in silk above, and as he aims up his gun and his flashlight, he also sees what's left of Annabelle Harrow, which is this humongous spider. It is this black, pulsating, shiny spider body with 8, baseball bat-sized legs, chitinous hooks that are hooking into the web. And despite this huge black widow-like body, the face is like this yellow melting skin of an old woman, decrepit, red watery yolk-like eyes, and needle-sharp, teeth that are all in rows in her mouth. And she ends up starts coming down there, and he sees that there's like a stinger or feeding tube that gets pulled out of, McKenna as he's getting drained of all of his fluid. And that's when the sheriff decides to make a last-minute decision, which is that does he want to fight threat or does he want to take the easier way out? And that's when he first decides to shoot Frank McKenna to put him out of his misery. And right as, old lady Harrow is chasing towards him, he ends up putting the shotgun to his face and then shooting himself. This was a very short story, so I kind of took away points for that. I wanted it to be longer and more fleshed out. Pretty simple. But nonetheless, I give it like a 7.2, 7.3 out of 10. It's a decent story. The haunted house is very scary. The urban legend behind the Harrow house and Annabelle Harrow is quite creepy. And there's the idea that she had sold her soul to the devil, sold her soul to some demons. And in order to get eternal life, that's why she got turned into that giant mutated spider and has to drain the liquid life force, the blood and meat and bones of all of her victims to keep herself alive, which is quite morbid and horrific. But I did feel like it wrapped up too soon. I also do like the ending where instead of fighting the thing, the guy's like, yeah, fuck this, and he just takes them both out of their misery. That's morbidly funny in itself. But I do wish it was a longer story. But it is what it is. I'm happy to still get the chance to read it. So yeah, those are the 3 stories that I covered for today, the first installment of Curran from the Crypt done. Let me know what you guys thought about these stories. Have you checked on any of Tim Curran's work? Are you planning on it? Let me know if you're planning on reading any of his books or short stories. Maybe I can give you guys some recommendations. And stay tuned for future content to come involving Curran and all the other horror authors and content that I cover on this channel. That's all I got for today. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, comment down below. Deuces.